What's the one tip you think is the most important that's in the book? Like the one thing, if they get nothing else out of the book, they should take this.
I really think that having a good relationship with your emotions is something I love talking about in this book, because then I think it frames all of the other skills in terms of rumination, in terms of acceptance and building a life you love. This idea that emotions are not the weather is super powerful to me. They are not just things that happen to you. They are data, and they are something that you can be in conversation with. You are not just passively having emotions happen to you. Now, this isn't to say there aren't real emotional disorders or things like that where there's other factors happening. But for most people, when you feel sad, it can come out of nowhere seemingly. Instead of adding this like resistance layer to it, again, of like, I don't like this, I'm bad, I feel bad that I feel sad, I feel shame that I'm sad. Instead of doing that, being like, okay, I notice that I'm sad, just noting it. That's a powerful mindfulness technique, is noting.
Welcome to the Child Free Wealth Podcast, hosted by Bree and Dr. J, Certified Financial Planner. Here we discuss life and finances as it relates to being child-free. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only. Please consult your advisor before implementing any ideas heard on this podcast.
All right, so this one is for the soloists out there. We've been looking for more and more content on what is it like to be single, and did I find something for you. We have Meghan Keane, who is the author of a new book come out this month called Party of One. And Meghan Keane is the founder and managing producer for NPR's Life Kit, a podcast and radio show that brings listeners advice and actionable information about personal finances, health, parenting, relationships, and more. Prior to founding Life Kit, Keane was a producer for NPR's award-winning Invisibilia and a founding producer for NPR's TED Radio Hour, one of NPR's top podcasts since its debut. She currently lives with her dog, Margot. Now, I was hoping Margot would join us, but she's at work in Washington, D.C. Come on, if you're going to come, you might as well bring Margot.
I know. Well, also, she has a cone on right now because she has a little medical emergency that is all fine, but needs a cone. So,
although that's
arguably cuter that way, in a way, So, yes, yeah. No, Margot's the real star.
I've come to the conclusion any dog emergency is a $3,000 bill if you just walk into the emergency vet. Is that about right?
So I had an even greater emergency with her 2 months ago. What that cost before pet insurance, $12,000. And it costs pet insurance, luckily paid about $7,500. I know this is a financial podcast, so I feel like I'm giving transparency here, but I was able to pay the rest, thankfully, with my emergency savings. I was like, that's what it's there for. But yes, luckily this one was a cool $200 incident, not anything less than $12K. I was like, all right, we're good.
It's always those ones that get you. People are like, are you really going to spend that much on your pet? Yes, I am. Okay, like seriously.
Yeah, they're your baby.
Our pug ate raisins. And it was $3,000,
no.
Cause that's deadly to a pug,
Right.
He was fine. He's like, yeah, this is yummy, but like.
Aw, poor guy. Yeah.
So Margaret's got the cone of shame. All right, we'll miss that. All right, you got a new book came out this month, and I'm always excited about talking with authors because I got my book coming at the end of the year. So like, this is my thing. And we talk about single folks as soloists. So we're talking about, in our case, single, no kids. But like, you dove into this topic because it's you. Like, the single life, the kind of life you lived, you shared a bunch of your stories. Why'd you write this book?
I wanted to write this book because I was experiencing something in my late 20s where I was in this space where I wanted a partner. I knew I wanted to have, romantic connection. That for a lot of people, only natural, right? I knew I wanted that, but I wasn't getting that. And it was becoming, in my mind, harder and harder to find that partnership. And I was in this space between knowing it was awesome and wonderful to be single. My mom's a widow. My aunt's never married. I have a lot of great friends who are single, and I loved my life and had this great job and friends and a wonderful day-to-day existence. But I had a hard time getting my body and my soul to catch up to the reality that being single is wonderful and there's nothing to be ashamed of. After a few breakups that I had from kind of short relationships that felt really big to me, and I was feeling really exceptionally down from them, I got a catch my brain and my body up together here? How do I find tools and use my journalism skills of talking to experts to actually see what does it mean to cast off shame about singleness, which I've learned is really impactful for both married people, partner people, and single people.
That's fair. So you set out to write a book, and it's kind of one of those things. Anytime you write a book, like there's a reason you're doing that. Like, it's not about, let's be real, it's not about the money, because authoring does not make you the big bucks.
Yeah.
Anyone who you're going to make, no, you don't make all that money. But there are books about being single. There are some, but why yours? What was the story that you want people to get from you or your experience that's different?
Sure. I was finding that a lot of the self-help books out there a lot of them were saying, hey, here's how to get yourself ready for a relationship, right? Here's how to do the work on you so then you can blossom mysteriously into the most fully formed version of yourself so then you can be in a relationship. But if anyone knows anyone, we know plenty of people in our lives who are partnered or married and have done zero work on themselves, right? There is no prerequisite to being in a romantic relationship. I was seeing that on one hand, but then I was also seeing, and these are great books, I think, books where it's saying, you only want to be single or only be a soloist, I'm right there with you. Here's how to think about your life. And I said, that's awesome. I don't know if that's quite me either. I think I'm kind of in the middle where I could see two realities unfold for myself where one, I could have a life with a partner or I could be single for most of my life. But I want to make sure that the longest relationship I will have is the one with myself. And that is a good one, no matter which reality becomes true. So I kind of think about it as the spectrum of singleness and soloness to married. And I was like, I feel like my book is more in the middle, and I just wanted to give space for that.
So you're taking both sides, is what you're saying, let's
yes,
be
fair
real
and balanced.
No, I'm just trying to get it, because there are some people that, because we talk a lot about child-free stuff, people are like, oh, if you're a fence sitter, you're not sure which side you're on. Well, that's not the same, and that's kind of what you're talking about from the single life. I could be happy by myself, I could be alone, I could be in a couple, but you're kind of playing both sides, which is perfectly fine. But it's often with books, you have to take one stance.
Yeah, well, the stance is not one or the other. It's actually, you always can choose yourself, even in a relationship. Maintaining your own personhood has all this wonderful research to show that you're actually happier in those relationships. There's a reason I didn't put, how to be single on the cover. So, be your own best life partner. I wanted the answer to be yes. If you take off the shame of singleness, then it provides all these wonderful benefits of then you're just focusing on having a really full life, no matter where you land.
That's fair. And you start off talking about, you call it the haze, and we call it the standard life script. The standard life script says you go to school, you get married, you have kids, it's the American dream, the house, the picket fence, the 2.5 kids. But you call it the haze. Talk to me about what that means and how you look at it.
Yeah, the stigma that's around singleness, especially, like you said, this prescribed life plan for pretty much most Americans, all Americans, right? That you, like you said, you get married, then you have kids and you live in the suburbs and that's the end, right? And I called it the haze because it reminds me of when you're driving in fog and when you're completely enveloped, you're thinking, wow, it feels like there's nothing but this fog, right? There's nothing but this haze, and it feels very all-consuming. But as soon as you drive out of that or poke your head out from the side of where the edge of the haze is, you're like, oh, there's a whole world out here. It wasn't just all this. And I thought that was a pretty powerful image because that's how I felt, because it felt like this default that I honestly thought I wasn't choosing or subscribing to, but it still was leaking around me and into my brain and around me. And once I started to be like, okay, can I actually see if this is what I really want for myself? And maybe it is, but I didn't give myself an opportunity to actually ask those questions about, well, what kind of partnership do I actually want? What do my values of my life want to be? Do I actually want to have kids? Maybe I do, maybe I don't. It becomes you because you're such on autopilot. Sometimes people don't stop to think what they actually want, and then go forward, do what you want, right? But the haze just reminded me that it is definitely it can feel all consuming, but you can poke your head out from it and see a much bigger world and reality around you.
You can, and I always encourage people, kind of whose voice in your head saying you got to do that, and we have all these societal pressures, culture, religion, family. But we also get to a point where like, that's not my voice. Did you have that moment? Is that kind of what you're saying in the haze? Or was it more just kind of a foggy thing?
Yeah, the voice in my head felt that's what's so detrimental about it. I feel like it feels like it is your only voice, right? And so like this kind of came really to a head for me was the pandemic where, you know, I was really only spending time with my mom. We were living in Maryland together at the time, and, you know, two single ladies, you know, where your world shrunk so much. And so in my head, it really did feel like the only voice, right? That's what's so insidious about, you know, cultural messaging is that, yeah, you don't realize whose voice it actually is. And so for me, I was like, I have to be better to myself. And if this is the voice and I can choose these voices and if I can not actually be my thoughts, just see them as kind of like passing, then that is going to lead to a lot more ease in my life than rather be a total victim to the narrative that I'm telling myself about myself.
Well, yeah, and I think you're on the right page. I think the challenge is separating what you think is your voice versus the others. You know, because we're all brainwashed. Let's be real on this. Like, you know, whatever that is, the way we were raised, whatever it says, you got to do this. And that gets reinforced day in, day out. So how did you start on that journey? Like, how do you like pause and go, is this really me? Like, is there like a trigger, or is it just like, I don't know, it evolved over time?
In the book, I talk a lot about the difference between goals and values. And I thought it was actually really fascinating to kind of illuminate what you're talking about is like, what do I want versus what do other people want for me? And the difference between goals and values, this comes from Dr. Pooja Lakshman, who's a psychiatrist and wrote this wonderful book called Real Self-Care. And she talks about how goals are these things that it's very pass-fail, right? They are like an outcome where either you're married or you're not. You have kids or you don't. And you automatically are setting yourself up for a failure if you don't have that thing, right? It can be really hard on yourself. But what she told me to do is to think about the values underneath a goal, which is something we often don't identify, and think about, okay, I want marriage. Okay, well, what are some of your values around that? Well, I like family. I like community. Okay, maybe you find that there's more flexibility in what a partnership looks like. Maybe it means that you actually don't want to live with that partner and within your marriage, or maybe it means you're actually okay with the idea of not getting married, but maybe you can be a really active member in your community in some way, or a mentor or a coach. And like when you start looking at the values underneath a goal, you start to see a lot more of the flexibility of what is on offer. And I think that can help you distinguish, again, what is like society telling you what to do and versus what you actually want to do. And like, I feel like the secretly annoying part of this work is that you see that the values work is a lot kinder than what the things that society tells you to do, because they are so rigid. And if you fall outside of it, you're somehow seen as a loser or a failure. When the reality is, if you're single, all it means is you don't have a romantic partner in your life for a lot of reasons. I know I talked to one author too, who's written a lot about singleness, and she was like, maybe instead of thinking of all the reasons why you're single as like a bad thing or negative reasons, why don't you think about them as good? Maybe you protected yourself from bad relationships. You're not settling. You're protecting your peace, you know? Like you can flip these things really easily, because often when society is telling you to do something or someone's telling you to do something, it's really about how they feel about themselves.
And that's fair. I mean, we intentionally use the word soloist because single sometimes comes with baggage. And, you know, one of my colleagues runs a podcast called Redefining Spinsterhood. You know, you get some of these terms. They're just like old fashioned thoughts, but it's like, okay, cool. Is that the life I want to live, or do I want to do something different? And the question we ask people, and I'm going to ask you this one, is, okay, if we're going down that values path, and rather than 100% goals, what's the impact you want to make on the world? Which is, you know, this is the question of like, when you leave, what does that Meghan-shaped hole look like? Have you done that debate?
That's a good question. I have not done that specifically, but what's funny is like, I think of legacy as in my life is like kind of like honestly a short-ish term thing, if that makes sense. Legacy to me probably lasts like around 50, 60 years after, this is maybe morbid, after I've died, which I'm okay with, actually. Like, what I hope that impacts people in my current life and the people who come right after me is maybe a sense of like kindness, that they learn a kindness or a lesson that I have been able to impart, that maybe they think about their work differently or how they approach management. Like I think a lot about on Life Kit, how I manage and what kind of work culture we have. It's super important to me. So when people report back to me like, hey, like how you do this informed how I went and worked with someone else. Like that's super important to me. So when I think about the Meghan shape hole, I think about those values of like responsibility is a big one for me, belonging, interdependence. Those are like the three big ones that when I did some values work that came up for me. So in terms of after I die, who's to say? But like, I know that you can, do it in a very meaningful way. I'm sure you talk about this on your podcast about planned giving, right? And like where you leave your money after you die, what kind of generational wealth you want to leave behind, whether it's to a blood relative or to an organization that you care about. So for me, I'm still thinking about legacy in the short term. I'll be honest.
Well, and that's fair. I mean, most of our people actually don't care about how much they pass on to the next generation. It's more of like, what impact do I leave? And one of the questions we ask people is, okay, what's the second line of your obituary? So the first one is Meghan dies at this age, this location. The next line is usually mother of three,
right.
Leaves behind these people. Okay, well, if you're saying, all right, I'm going to follow the soloist life and I'm going to do something different, what does that line look like? And it's one of those, like, it may be a legacy question, but it is a directional. It's not necessarily a goal, like, because we don't all want to die and we don't want to. Where are we headed? Because there's all of these assumptions. And the obituary is just the silliest example of like, there's a script for writing it and here's the blanks you fill in. And now people get into, well, if I'm single, am I dying alone? And all the negatives, like,
right.
Like I lose my mind a little about it. And I think if we can think about impact or something different as the measure of us, and I wish we could say no measure whatsoever, but I think we're all just like a little too type A to do that. But like, how do we get away from that? I mean, like you talk about in the book about this myth about dying in a couple, you're not going to die. You're going to die alone. Well, everybody's going to die alone, but that's the bottom line.
The idea you will be surrounded by all of your grandkids holding your hand as you meet your final hours. I mean, that's a lovely image. It doesn't happen for everyone. There's people, you can have a huge family and not talk to most of them, right? Or be in fights with them, or just life happens. And so I think people need to stop thinking of marriage and partnership as a guarantee of how the end of your life, what your impact's going to be, like you're talking about, how your last final days are going to be, right? My mom was widowed about 20 years ago, right? And so she didn't expect that. She thought, I have a husband and a daughter and this is how it's going to be. And then life happened. And I see now how all these people in her life come to her once they've recently been widowed and be like, I didn't think it would happen to me. And she's like, I know, like, I understand, but and she's actually a great model of, I've been able to think about single life and solo life is like having a really great community because you don't know what's going to happen. I've heard from people who are hospice workers that when it's sometimes the people who are single who have more friends around them when they're at their last days. There's no guarantee about what's going to happen in those last final hours. If you're so lucky to have time and advance warning to give people that this is the end, right? Yeah, it's more about focusing on how do you keep maintaining a diversity of connections in your life beyond the romantic, because it just makes you happier and healthier in general while you're still here too.
You're kind of like, I'm preaching to the choir here, but you have to be okay with you. Like, you have to be okay with your choices, who you are. And we've had a lot of discussions. We serve both child-free people and childless. Child-free tending to be by choice, childless not so much. And there's the childless by circumstance, which is like, hey, I didn't find the right partner, my life going a different way, whatever reason. But we often, with the folks that are childless, talk about it as they have to go through somewhat of a grieving process of the life they thought they were going to live before they can get there. And my question there is, okay, if we're going to embrace your book and kind of keep an open opportunity both ways, single, maybe not. The challenge then is we can't truly grieve what we thought it was going to be, because we still have those two paths. How do you square that circle?
You're right. It's really, really tough for a person who really wanted kids and you were like, I have thought about this, I want this, and then it just doesn't happen. That is a heartbreak. And I'm 35 and I see a lot of people in my life going through infertility issues, miscarriages, and it's just so, obviously, it's just so common. I'm sure you hear these stories all the time. So it is a heartbreak when it's something you truly want and it just doesn't happen. In terms of like squaring, wanting something and then realizing that your life is maybe going a different direction, I drew a lot from dialectical behavior therapy, which is a way to tap into tools that help you deal with these big emotions. So a lot of that grieving process is very real, but the cause of the suffering is a lot of resistance, right? So it's like resistance against, I thought my life was going this way and it's not, and I'm angry about it, and you keep pushing up against it. And dialectical behavior therapy teaches is one, this idea of radical acceptance. Radical acceptance does not mean you have to accept something that is harmful or abusive. It's just taking a moment when you're feeling that resistance to be like, hey, I'm noticing I'm resisting. How does that feel in my body? It's a real mindfulness technique. How does that feel in my body? What's happening? Why am I resisting? And then thinking to yourself, things are exactly how they're meant to be right now. And again, it's not to say I like this or I'm going to do everything in my power to change it. It's just saying this is where things are right now. And whenever I do that, I honestly feel just like a little weight just kind of fall. Not completely. I don't automatically feel like now I feel great, I can go on. It's just about this temporary exercise that the more you do it, it builds as a muscle and it helps you at least accept where you're at currently, because then you can move forward with choice. And then what DBT also recommends is doing things like accumulating positives. That's a huge thing. These are really tiny things, it feels like, but they really do build up and there's a lot of research to prove it. So accumulating positives is just making sure you're building in positive events and noticing positive events into your everyday life. It could be as simple as, I paid my bills on time today. Hey, I walked the dog. I got to cuddle Margot today. You know, that's an only in me positive event. I got to see a friend I haven't seen in a while. Noticing positive events actually helps, researchers shown, with your resilience over time. And so what you're doing is you're saying, oh, there is a lot of good in my life, right? Building mastery is another great tool, right? Which is just feeling that you did something and accomplished something. It doesn't mean you have to be the world's greatest tennis player or like have exceptional skill at something, but noticing when you do something well. Because it feels good to do something well. Again, even if it's something like, hey, I was able to ride my bike to work today when last week I was too tired. And those are tools that, again, I know they seem simple, but a lot of just like mindfulness and repetitiveness of reminding yourself if there's resistance, how can you kind of call out the resistance and accept it for where you are right now? And then building in the positive tiny moments. Those build up and have a huge cumulative effect.
They do, and I saw in the book you're talking about gratitude journals. Love that. Love the 3 good things type, approach.
Always good.
There's ways to embrace it, and that's really talking about today. Now, my challenge to you is, okay, you write this book and you have kind of choose your own adventure. One is I might end up single. One is I might end up coupled up. That's okay. How do you plan for both? Because I'm coming at this from a life and financial planning standpoint. That's what we do. How do you plan for both? Because one of the challenges we have is people come to us and if they haven't made a decision about having kids or not, we say follow the standard plan until you change your mind, because then everything changes your life and financial plan. If you're trying to hold open both paths, in my example, the 2 plans diverge and I do different finances, different life, different business choices. So if I choose both, I might be single and I might be coupled. How do you plan ahead?
I think what happens when you imagine these 2 opposite paths, having partnership or being single, is the key is to reducing the pressure to partner in the first place. Because if you are so stressed about being partnered like I have, I write about some breakups in the beginning of the book that felt really awful because my self-worth was on the line. So if you are so pressured to partner, it will drive you up a wall and it'll make you feel like it is the only path. But if you're able to kind of dial down the pressure to partner and to be just open to it. If it happens, it does. That's great. Then it just feels like you get to live life instead of waiting for something to happen, because that's often, I feel like, what happens with people. I've been there where you feel like, well, I can't actually start my life, quote unquote, until I have a partner. So you wait to do things like travel. I was always good about saving money. My grandfather was an estate lawyer. So that was this was some early lessons in my life. But yeah, people wait to travel. They wait to do big things. They wait to buy houses sometimes. I feel like that's changing now, which is great. But the way I was able to kind of keep those two realities in my head was like, I was like, my self-worth cannot be on the line here, whether or not I get partnered, because I have to be okay with either outcome, because I only have one life and I want to enjoy it and actually see what's in front of me rather than feeling like I'm in a waiting room. And that really changed the game for me, because I just lived with a lot more ease. And I was like, oh, this time I have right now, it's really special. Like, I'm ignoring how special it is by being obsessed with an outcome. And then so that was really helpful for me to be like, my life is special and my self-worth is not on the line here in terms of dating. And that was a huge relief.
And I'm with you. And whether it's radical acceptance or whatever you want to call it, there's a whole bunch of fun terms behind it.
Yes.
But you brought up your grandfather, estate planning, all that. Okay, let's use that as an example. The path for a soloist and the path for a couple, for estate planning, long-term care, a bunch of those, they're two different paths. We plan completely differently, because if you have to plan for 100% your care yourself versus you might be with a partner who you might be sharing care, other things, they're different. And by the way, just like who makes decisions for me, the paperwork, all that fun stuff. How do you do that? How do you plan for both opportunities right now in your life? And maybe you're not there yet, but that's the big question.
That's a good question. I mean, the path I've taken is plan like I'm always going to be single forever. And then partnership has changed that, right? And then you adjust. Yeah, like I said, my grandfather was an estate lawyer, and he actually did this thing where he wrote me letters and I had to open them on different ages. They were in a security deposit box at the bank, and they came for different stages of my life. And he wrote me one after he said he would stop writing them. And it was about how he was sitting in a divorce hearing, and he was hearing how a woman had signed over property to her husband and ended up losing pretty much everything in this divorce. And he's like, promise me you will never do that. If our family helps you with buying an apartment or property or anything, that you will not sign it over. Always keep something for yourself. So that was instilled in me quite early, of even if you do partner, maybe it's a yours, mine, and ours type approach, right? Keeping something separate. I mean, it's become more popular even within my friend groups, getting prenups as they enter a partnership. Yeah, I mean, I'm curious, well, what have you found to be more beneficial?
I don't care about if you combine your bank accounts. That's the easy part, the check. The question is, are you planning together?
Yeah.
So if you're on your own plan, they're on their plan, and you guys are completely separate, I don't care if you're married or not, that's a legal piece of paper. Okay, we're each kind of doing our own thing. What happens is the fun part for soloists is they get to do whatever they want. Mm-hmm. It can be a little bit overwhelming. It's kind of that paradox of choice routine of if I can do anything, what do I do? You know, and then a partner comes in. 32% childless folks will never marry. So a lot of when I say partner, it may or may not be a legal marriage. People ask me, should you get married? I'm like, do you need health insurance? No? Okay, well then who cares? But your partner comes in and says, hey, I got different plans. Do you discard yours? Do you guys build things together? And for the estate planning, that's the one that keeps me up at night, which is okay, you get in a car crash, who makes your medical decisions, your financial decisions, and who lets Margot out? Yeah. They sound like silly questions, but these are huge.
Yeah, I feel you. And I think that's what's maybe a benefit too of people partnering a little later in life or potentially getting married later in life, is that they know to ask some of these questions earlier in the process of getting partnered, rather than oh crap, we're already married and we have completely different values and about our money and how we should think about how to divide labor in the household, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's what I'm really encouraged by, is I feel like people now are much more open to having extremely hard conversations, or even just not even hard, frank conversations, right? Also being hey, this is what I'm planning to do with this money. This is my money. here's how we can combine in certain ways, but I'm letting you know that this is what's happening with me. It always comes down to right communication. I think so I guess in a way you can kind of plan for both, like, and see where, even as a soloist, like seeing like, okay, if I do want a partner, what's plan B? What would I feel comfortable with? And knowing what compromises would be like, you would be willing to, and what are your absolutely like your hell knows, like this is not going to happen in this way. And that can help you then as you're dating or getting to know someone and things are going well, maybe not a first date conversation, but things are going pretty well. Be like, hey, let's like open those bank accounts. Like, let's talk about like, what does this actually mean to merge our lives? Because there's this, have you heard of this term called sliding? When people move in together before they actually discuss all these things, and then things just become easy, and then you become accustomed to a certain lifestyle. And then if you break up, all of a sudden, oh wow, you're used to splitting the rent and splitting groceries, and your financial life looks so different. And I never wanted to be in a situation like that. I was always very clear to myself, like, okay, well, I'm going to just go through life as if like this, I'm the only person whose money I have to care for. Then I'll adjust and talk about like finances and also financial habits too, as we go forward with that.
Yeah, and that's fair. I'm a big fan of like doing the date where you show each other your credit reports. Like, I'm a big fan of prenups, even if you don't sign the paperwork, working through it, like the questions in it. It's interesting. And just in case you haven't seen it, there's a great study Fidelity put out on the cost of being single. And they've called it the rise of solo households. And they figure it costs between $400,000 and $1 million across your lifetime to be single. Extra.
Yeah. It's expensive to be single.
Yeah. And people don't think about it, Although, interesting enough, the census looked at childless adults over 55. They found that in adults over 55, the people with the highest net worth are single childless women.
That does not surprise me. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't surprise me. And yeah, what's interesting too is like, I am really encouraged to also see people like Raina Cohen, who's a colleague of mine. She wrote this great book called The Other Significant Others, talking about people putting friendship at the center of their lives and what does that mean? And, seeing more examples of how people cohabitate with friends, even as they age, right? Like, that solves a lot of other issues besides money, right? Like loneliness and companionship and making sure just someone is there when your dog needs to be let out and you're not home that night. I just think it's just like, it's just so single-minded to think that living in a single family unit in the suburbs is like automatically the only way to go, right? There's so many other options and they can be ultimately so beneficial.
You're on the right page. We call it the Golden Girls home,
my dream.
I had somebody for my first book I interviewed. She wants to do the Golden Girls home in a castle in the middle of Europe somewhere. And I'm like, well, first of all, that's pretty drafty and cold, but all right, like let's do it. And we've had a lot of discussion on that. And I think you're going to see more of those co-housing structures, the alternative living structures, whether it's family, friends, whatever. It's got to happen.
Yeah. I mean, people always talk about how their favorite parts of their friendships, not always, but was like college or like at least the style of like you just stop by someone in the dorm, right? And just have all these quick casual connections with people in terms of just saying hi and dropping in. And that gets taken away, right? And then all of a sudden you're calendaring out 3 months from now, are you going to get coffee? And then not do it for another 5 months, right?
That's fair. To kind of bring this together, what's the one tip you think is the most important that's in the book? Like the one thing, if they get nothing else out of the book, they should take this.
I really think that having a good relationship with your emotions is something I love talking about in this book, because then I think it frames all of the other skills in terms of rumination, in terms of acceptance and building a life you love. This idea that emotions are not the weather is super powerful to me. They are not just things that happen to you. They are data, and they are something that you can be in conversation with. You are not just passively having emotions happen to you. Now, this isn't to say there aren't real emotional disorders or things like that where there's other factors happening. But for most people, when you feel sad, it can come out of nowhere seemingly, right? Instead of adding this like resistance layer to it, again, of like, I don't like this. I'm bad. I feel bad that I feel sad. I feel shame that I'm sad, or, shame that I'm a single, or just like adding on and adding on. Instead of doing that, being like, okay, I notice that I'm sad, just noting it. That's a powerful mindfulness technique, is noting. And then being like, I notice that I'm sad. This is how it feels in my body. This is what the thoughts I'm having. Then you can actually process emotions. I feel like that's such a word that gets thrown around is like, you got to process your emotions. No one tells you how to do that though. Just getting to the reality of, okay, this is what's happening in my body with no judgment. This is what's happening in my head around sadness. I am going to like feel this, and then I'm going to move on to something else. Instead of having it feel like, okay, I'm in complete, utter, no control of this. I think that's really powerful because then you can start to see, okay, this is what's happening right now. And I can regulate, right? Emotional regulation is not about being in a state of zen all the time. It's not about being happy all the time. It's about understanding what choices you have. And I think that's super powerful because dysregulation is that resistance to an emotion, right? When you have a big emotion and you're like, I don't like this, I don't want this, I hate this, right? You can feel those things. But then knowing techniques to be like, you're noting it, you're bringing your body down from like a high, and then giving yourself a choice to do something nourishing to take care of yourself instead of perseverating and then leading to this idea of like ruminating and being like, well, if I just think for 30 more minutes about how to solve this problem, about why I'm single and what's wrong with me. I'm a classic overthinker. I used to think that was the only way to solve problems is to think harder. And sometimes you do need to just take a break. And that's the more nourishing things. For me, seeing your emotions as data and not as the weather, and you can be in conversation with it to help regulate, I think that's golden. And I think it just helps in every aspect of life once you start to notice it.
I think you're on the right path, and I think your awareness of what you enjoy. You talk a lot about rumination and other things in the book, and I always say that you need three people in your life. You need somebody to help you look back, somebody will help you look up, kind of be the spiritual, and somebody will help you look forward. If you spend too much time looking back, ruminating, you need and if you like hanging out there, you need somebody to kick you in the butt and move you forward. Mm-hmm. If you're always looking forward and you're never looking back, you got to do a bit of both. So I think you're on the right page. So when I was reading the book, I'm married. It's not necessarily something that applies to me, but a lot of my clients. It's really interesting. So where did they get the book? Where did they find you?
You can go to my website and order the book. It's MeghanVKane.com, and last name is spelled Keane. You can also find me on Instagram at Dame Kane. Again, Keane. And there's links to order the book and find me on Instagram and say hi.
Well, thanks for joining us. I'm sure my soloist audience is always looking for more on this content, so I am sure they'll be reaching out to you.
Oh, I'm so glad. That sounds great. Thanks for having me.
If you enjoyed the show, please consider leaving a rating or review. We'd love to keep the conversation going. Please let us know your thoughts wherever comments are available or email us at media@childfreewealth.com. To stay up to date, find and follow Child Free Wealth on social media. If you're interested in working with us, learn more by visiting our website, childfreewealth.com. We'll see you next time.